Hello, everyone. It's Lisa Starr from StarrCast, and we have some illustrious guests today to talk about, I think, a topic that's very relevant right now, especially. So let me start by saying that one of my roles is as the task force chair for the consulting initiative of the Global Wellness Institute. What does that mean? It's just that we are a coalition of consultants around the world. We try to gather information, put it on our website to help developers, owners find a consultant that they need in the country that they're looking for. But, spa consultants, spa and wellness consultants have a variety of capabilities, shall we say. Everybody's different and all of our specialties are a little different. So it's somewhat of a start of a list, but it's not a beautiful thing. We're working on it. But why am I telling you this story? Because of that, Global Wellness Institute Consulting Initiative, availability of names, we get contacted by developers and people who around the world are thinking they'd like to start a wellness project. And I do have to say that's been happening more now post-COVID. I'll say post-COVID for most of us than it did before. We are getting contacted by people who are not from the industry, and they have one question all of the time. And that question is, we'd like to develop a wellness project, but where's the data? Where is the data that shows what the return is if you add wellness features to your hotel or resort property? Where is the data on that? And I have to say, we don't really have specifics. And this is something that I want to dive into. And so I've asked two people to join me who are experts on this topic. First, we have Jan Freitag, the National Director of Hospitality for CoStar, formerly STR, and joining us from Nashville, United States. And we have Laszlo Puczko, the man I know with the most degrees possible. He is the founder of HTWW Life and a wellness tourism advisor based in Budapest. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today on StarrCast.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Jan, could you give the audience just a brief background on yourself and how you came to be in your role?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and good to see you again, Laszlo. So I have been with a company called STR, which used to be called Smith Travel Research, for 20 years. March 1 this year was my 20th anniversary.
Wow.
STR,
congrats.
Yes, thank you. That's something that our kids certainly will never say, that they've been with the same shop for 20 years.
Isn't that true?
Not going to happen. But it's been a great ride. I have been in a variety of roles within STR, and they're all very outward facing. I speak to the press, I do presentations, I fly around and stand on stages and give to the state of the hotel industry. STR was acquired right before the pandemic in late 2019 by a company called CoStar, which is the premier provider of commercial real estate data. So they know a lot about office, retail, industrial warehouse, and multifamily vacancies and average rents. And so they just added the hotel sector to it. All of this is available in an online platform. And for them, I'm now the national director for US hospitality, and I do exactly the same thing that I did for STR. So I write, I talk to reporters, and I make monthly videos, and I talk about the state of the US.
Your videos are so great. I love watching them. They deliver information, but in an entertaining way. Laszlo, tell us how you came to be a wellness tourism advisor.
First of all, it's great to see you two, and obviously all the listeners, not seeing them, but assuming that they're listening to us.
Hopefully.
Eventually. Yes, eventually. Anytime, really. So it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I have been in this field of creating experiences, many of which happen to be well-being oriented experiences for 20 plus years in various capacities at project level, as well as at government or strategic level, and even policy creating level or influencing level. And obviously, as you quite rightly mentioned in the preamble, that every single time that was the situation, that's all very nice, that's brilliant, but what is it going to do? in terms of performance or in terms of benchmark, in terms of how is this better than anything else, really. And so obviously, because of my personal business or the affiliations, got into this digging and understanding a little bit more about it. And the more you dig, the less you know. I think Jan can confirm that in a way. And also had a hotel performance solution, which was a local version of STR's product for 8 years or so, because many of the operators actually are not branded. So knowing that a branded hotel in a capital city performs such and such may not be of such great use to a local family-owned small property. So we operated a system that was a solution that was mainly serving such owners. So I know Jan's headache sometimes when he's worried about data and reliability of data and all the rest of it. So that was really the initial motivation, that we do complicated models for impact assessments and assumption creations and modeling of what exactly we can expect, knowing that the Excel can actually prove anything.
Great. So let's go back to sort of where this conversation came from. And me having a background in spa for 30 plus years, I remember when the Global Spa Summit started, and it eventually evolved into the Global Wellness Summit and then the Global Wellness Institute. But back when it was spa, and, hotels started adding spa, it became a Forbes factor. And we were all saying, well, what is the value of that? We really didn't have data to show us. We had some anecdotal numbers that came out of, I think, Mandarin Oriental probably 15 years ago, who said that they definitely saw bumps in ADR and occupancy, longer occupancies when there was a spa attached to the hotel. And so Jan and I have had conversations over the years about how do we track those spa numbers? And there was an attempt made, which I will probably get into. Unsuccessfully, it didn't have legs and it didn't last. And now we're faced with the fact that wellness is so broad. We don't have a global spa summit anymore. It's a global wellness summit. And every other month there's a new modality added. And so how do we measure it? Now, we have the Global Wellness Institute to thank for at least summing up the size of the industry at large. The numbers delivered in the summit in early December of 2021 were that the industry had a $4.4 trillion size in 2020. The biggest bubble, it's what we call the bubble chart. There are a couple that are about $1 trillion each. Personal care and beauty and healthy eating, nutrition, and weight loss are each almost $1 trillion. Physical activity, which boomed in COVID, is also large. You've got wellness, real estate, mental wellness, et cetera. So we have really good data now on the size of those sectors across industry, across country. And you can find that report for listeners who haven't seen it at the Global Wellness Institute website. So we have that data, but it isn't that specific on what kinds of services deliver these numbers and what's going to happen now in the market. What we learned at the summit was that some of our sectors obviously took a hit in COVID from 2020, about a 40% hit, it was estimated for several of them. Certainly hospitality hugely hit, wellness tourism down 40%, spas down 40%, thermal facilities. Physical activity was down, fit tech went up, wellness real estate started to grow, healthy eating started to grow. The good news is that the researchers predicted that the market will rebound tremendously, and they are saying that we will be at the size of $7 trillion by 2025. That's a lot of dollars. And so I'd like to talk with the guests today about how do we make sense of that, right? I mean, and how, when we have a developer or an owner that wants to add wellness, how do we quantify the opportunity? Jan, I'm going to jump back to you because you, of course, have been doing it in hospitality. Maybe you could explain to us a little bit how the hospitality rankings work, and we can go from there.
Yeah, so the STR business model is very simple, which is what makes it so beautiful and so long lasting. So STR collects 3 numbers and they make 3 numbers, and that's really it. So we ask every hotel every day, how many rooms you have available, how many rooms did you sell, how much rooms revenue did you generate? And then out of that come the averages, occupancy, utilization, ADR, average daily rate, the average cost of a room, and then this number called RevPAR, that's really only used in the hotel industry, revenue per available room, which is, if you look at the math, it's just occupancy multiplied by room rate. It's not a number that you and I pay, but it's a good benchmark to use because you can compare across hotel types, across locations. So RevPAR is sort of the yardstick that people use, specifically percent change. So in my work, people often omit the absolute values. They don't care if it's if the room costs $100, $120. They want to know, is it more expensive? Is the room rate up? Is RevPAR up?
So it's really about moving up and down.
Correct. That's really what STR provides, is your performance and how you moved, and which of course but then STR gives you the opportunity to pick what's called a self-selected competitive set. So you pick 5 or 10 or, well, really not more than that, properties that you think you're competing with, and STR gives you the average for that. They do never release the individual property data of the individual hotel. That's confidential, but we make the averages. And so then people can say, oh, I'm better or worse than my competitive set. And then, of course, because we have the property level data, we can roll this up by submarket, by market, by continent, by price type, luxury, upper upscale, economy, by location type, all the resorts, all the urban hotels, whatever. It's, I always joke, like, all hotels in Texas that start with the letter L. I don't know why you want that, but we can do that because we have the property, we have the individual property. So we allow that benchmark, and again, the beauty of it is that everybody knows what room demand, rooms sold, and rooms revenue is, because there is something called the Uniform System of Accounts for the US lodging industry, USALI. I think it's the 11th or 12th edition right now. And it's very, very specifically spelled out what is rooms revenue and what is it not. And so we all sing from the same hymn book, so to speak. We all use the same basis of our calculations, and that's what makes it so comparable.
Yeah, on these hotels, they pay a monthly fee for this information. It isn't free. Is it based on like their size or their revenue? How do you determine that fee?
So there actually is a free product that we call the Hotel Survey, where if you give us data, we give you back market level data for free. But if you're saying, well, that's a little too high level, I really want to know what my competitive set is doing, then we're saying, well, now you're using this to make money. Now we want to make money. So it's the difference between interesting and actionable, right? The market level data is always free. It's interesting, but you can't reuse it that well. Actionable data costs money. So the price is just flat, except of course if you are with Hilton, Hyatt, Marriott, Kempinski, whatever, Shangri-La, because you get a lot of other services, the average property price comes down. But off the out of the gate, it's like $1,300 US or something per year. Don't quote me on that. I'm not a salesman.
No, but that's not that much to have this kind of information.
I agree.
And I'm fascinated that you get all of that from 3 questions. I mean, that's
how STR started. We are now doing a lot more. So we're going to talk about the spa data a little bit later on. Well, that's really buried sort of in the P&L. So every month now we're doing P&L report. We're looking forward. We have something called Forward Star. We have what's on your books. We ask the room that's sold, is it sold in increments of 10 or more to a group, or increments between 1 and 9, what we call transient? So the interplay between group and transient. We can do this by day of week. We can do it by quarter. So there are other ways to slice it. There are other data points that came in over time. But it all started with those 3.
Well, of course, that system works wonderfully in the United States, where we're all very, buttoned down and it's brand centric. It's easy to compare across levels, and it's not the same in Europe, right, Laszlo?
Partially is the same, but partially is not quite the same. But Jan knows that rather well and can confirm that. Individual properties may not want to spend 1,300 or how much that price tag was, or maybe in the end, or even more when your individual property, it could be higher because they don't have the group discount because they don't belong to a group. So they may not want to, and that's not as simple, I believe, than the US market. But as you know well, STR has been an established brand and has been used extensively in the European continent as well, obviously, given the presence of all the brands, all the companies that have been contracting STR back in the US. So do the same in Europe as well. But the role of the individual family-owned standalone businesses, I believe it's way higher than in the US. And especially so just those that are not actually branded. So it could be owned but belong to a brand, but those are family-owned, non-branded properties.
Yeah, so what we normally like to think about is that in the US, 30% of the rooms are independent and 70% are branded, part of a larger parent company. But that globally in Europe and Asia, that's actually flipped. So it's like a third roughly branded. Now that number is increasing, but still at least call it 2/3 or so of rooms that are not affiliated with any large parent company.
That's good to know. So, Laszlo, you have worked quite a bit in wellness tourism and the development of large-scale wellness resorts and developments. How have you come up with the data you need to help your investors?
I think I need to go back to one of the things that Jan mentioned, and that will be eventually the answer to your question, Lisa, is that when you collect three numbers, what we heard, it may not be representative to the issue that we want the answer to. So you have the data, but you need to dig not just deeper, but deep to the side, and then that becomes the TREFPAR issue. And in any property that may want to have an extensive, or not just extensive, but even a chunk of revenue coming from anything else but rooms or F&B, then it becomes most likely something to do with some healthy, wellness, medical, whatever, something beyond mice, obviously. So when you look at the TREFPAR and the REFPAR comparison, or the rule of thumb is that you have to do 2 to 1 to start with, otherwise you're doing something wrong. As in, your TREFPAR should be double as much as your REFPAR, and just to spell it out, TREFPAR is the total revenue per available room, so it's room plus anything else, and that it becomes a good benchmark figure that owners and operators would need to look at, especially at resort hotels or at hotels or resorts that focusing on wellness or the spa component, that they should be aiming at least 2 to 1. And then it obviously that's an exaggerated or rule of thumb sort of thing. So it could be 3 or it could be 0.8, but this is the kind of ballpark figure that should look at, because you would need to be able to double your revenue on your rooms with anything that has to do with wellness. And obviously that data come from actual properties that people have been, or us, we've been working for and with, and that's confirmed. So it's not a number that's created by a function Excel. That happens to be a factual data coming from a relatively large number of properties. Don't forget, the European market in terms of the wellness programming or wellness product is way more established than the North American market. I'm not talking about the Mexico coastal resort with the massive spa business. I'm talking about the countryside wellness property which has incorporating the wellness proposition in the hospitality component. It's not operated by a standalone operator. It's not a white label operator. It's operated as one unit. So this is when you have the proper data and you can calculate the TREFMA properly.
Well, thank you for that explanation. So just to recap what I'm hearing, you are assuming the total revenue will be 50% comprised from room and the other 50% from F&B or spa spend or other ancillary spend.
F&B is, in that case, may not even feature that much. It should be anything but the standard hospitality and F&B.
Okay.
Then it becomes the recreation, the leisure, the health, the wellness, the spa, and whatever else it is. So F&B is a separate measure.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for clarifying. So what we're hearing is that, oh, you'll have more money when you have wellness features. So that's good, right? That's a start, but is it enough?
I don't think we said that. I didn't. Because then you have the cost higher as well, the specialist personnel, the running costs, the heating of the saunas and the operating costs and all the rest of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you instantly starting from twice as much as revenue. I mean, theoretically, yes, but in terms of GOPs and gross operating profits and all that, that may not be the case at all. But how you are measuring it and how you compare it to another property, then it's not RevPAR, ADR, occupancy, but more like TREFPAR and RevPAR and TREFPAR and TREFPAR. And that gives a very different read to the performance and how anyone thinking about this should think of the business as such.
Okay. So Laszlo, you're approached by a country, as you are, a large developer that wants to develop a wellness project. How do you decide, should it have sauna? Should it have whirlpool? Should it have halotherapy, cryotherapy? What are the wellness activities that will make more or less money? What metrics do we have to start to put a measure to this?
That's a very good question, Lisa, and I hope you have 3 hours to discuss this because then in the end we may have some great results and great answers. But and I think that's a kind of a question posing to Jan as well. I believe that many of those great things that everybody is now labeling as wellness and expecting to boost room revenue or total revenue as such, I believe is going to be, or more like already is, entry-level service. So you cannot expect any revenue boost. You more like stay in business. So when someone says, "Oh, I will add this and this, therefore my performance will increase by 5%," I believe you're totally wrong. You're delusional, and I tell them they're delusional and they don't like it. Because they assume that just because I add, let's say, halotherapy, sauna, whatever it is, then my revenue is going to increase like, wow, 15-20%. And I really don't think so by any means, since, as you said in the very beginning, the market is really moving to a direction that you expect this to happen because you got used to it. This is what you do at home. It's part of your lifestyle. You're not prepared to pay extra because, guys, this is 2022. So what are you talking about? Charging for this? Extra, expecting me to pay more when it's just basic stuff, as in a couple of saunas in the gym and the healthy food and all that, and maybe a couple of yoga sessions and the running concierge. Like, yeah, sure, that's expected. So, and this is the answer to your question, Lisa, is first of all, just working on a 100-hectare project as such. So that is the question that I was posed by the owners. And I said, guys, forget saunas and steam rooms and all that stuff for the moment. Can we just please define the well-being DNA of your property? And when we define that, we may opt not having any saunas whatsoever because we will have a fantastic deck overlooking the nature where you are going to practice basically doing nothing. And this is what we charge totally for the DNA of the resort. That's what you buy, not the rooms. I know room is the bread and butter. Jan is going to correct me in a minute, but yes, the rooms are the bread and butter. Yes, But at the end of the day, you pay for the value added and the DNA, what the property actually does for you or to you as a person. So I do the sauna selection at the very last minute because I may not even need to have any saunas.
Mm. Well, that's definitely the case for a destination resort, for sure. Maybe some resort properties that are, hotel resort properties. Jan, let's have you weigh in on this. What are some options for us to begin measuring these activities and their impact?
So let me take you back to the very first global spa summit at the Waldorf all those years ago.
15 years ago.
When Mary Tabaki invited me to speak. And I said, Mary, I don't know anything about spa. I don't even know how to spell spa. And she's like, Jan, come. Yes, ma'am.
When Mary tells us to come, we go.
You go. And so I thought, okay, so here's what we can do. We can look at the performance of luxury hotels that have a spa, because we have that indicator. Do you have a spa, yes or no, versus the luxury hotels that don't have a spa. And I made this chart that has lived in infamy ever since. And I refresh it every time, Susan.
I'm sure I have a copy somewhere.
And my disclaimer that everybody forgets immediately is that I'm not talking about causality. I'm not saying because you have a spa, you have a higher rate. It just happens that you have a spa and you have a high rate, but maybe it's the other way around, right? In order to justify the high rate, you need to have a spa. And that's, where Laszlo obviously comes in, and says, is this really we need to think about the customer first. We need to think about your 100-hectare location first and say, what makes sense here, right? And then we decide, do we have a spa? Yeah, likely, but what does that look like? Do we have sauna, or is it more wellness oriented? Is it a huge gym, or is it just, as you said, a deck where you do nothing and look at nature? All of those things I think are taken into consideration when Laszlo looks at who is the customer, who are we trying to serve, and then are they willing to pay more. So we at the beginning just looked at, do you have a spa, yes or no, and what is there an impact on room rate and occupancy? And the occupancy impact was negligible, and the room rate impact was clearly visible. And so people took that and said, okay, if you have you can take a spa and you can charge higher room rate, which is not what I've said, but that's what everybody is taking. And I still, I've gotten the requests multiple times over the years. Can you just update that one chart, because it's on, slide 12 of our pitch deck for our spa. What we tried then is, because people said, oh, there's STR, can you start tracking it? We said, okay, let me try, to build up a Spa Star product. And that's when we bumped into all the problems, Lisa, that you're familiar with, Laszlo, that you're familiar with, which has to do with definition. What are we tracking? Is it relevant to you to then make an actionable decision on your property that helps you make more money? If we track the square footage of the treatment room, that's interesting, but are you really going to change the square footage of your treatment room? And it's like, no, the wall is the wall, So we bumped into a whole lot of conversations and a whole lot of issues about what are we tracking, and then the question of comparability, and then of course the question of sample set. Even though some of the larger hotel brands said, oh yeah, you can have our spa data, but then suddenly I had one in Cusco and one in Bangkok and one in Tokyo, and that's not comparable. So the project ultimately didn't work as well, just because we had global data, but not local data, and
not actionable because it wasn't in your market.
And that's, I think, where somebody like Laszlo can add so much value to say, yeah, Jan, this is interesting, and I'll use it as background, but you're on the ground talking to 6 or 7 or 10 operators in the country. You have much better insights then that helps you advise somebody who wants to do something similar.
Well, certainly, Jan, you make an excellent point. Like, having data of what happens in another city or country doesn't necessarily help me. However, it would be better than no data at this point, knowing something, right?
No, I have to agree with the head shaking of Jan, because because you can create totally false expectations that, oh, well, that property is working so beautifully, and you name a city. So the owner comes to you, or the operator comes to you, that, okay, I would like to see in your forecast this and this data, because it was fabulous. I want to have 5. And I said, well, that's may I oppose, please, saying that that's not relevant, or human resource costs are totally different, your energy costs are totally different, even if it's global, this and that. The owner expectations in terms of return is this and this, and so on and so on. And you say, like, technically, that's a spa with 5 treatment rooms and 23 therapists, and we are 5 treatment rooms and 21 therapists. But apart from that, there's nothing else similar. So that's where the problem starts. That even the terminology for spa, you already run into problems, as Jan just quite shortly pointed that out. And when you add the various other variations, what the destination spa then? They include it in the rooms, because it's sold on package prices. It's not an individual day prices. And STR, sorry, for me it's still STR. I'm sorry about that. It's daily, it's daily rates. But when you sell in a package, then what do? You divide it by the number of days, but it may not be relevant, because on Tuesdays you have 5, let's say, wellness things. On Thursday you have 0. So then what STR has been doing is you compare the Tuesdays and you compare the Wednesdays. Then the Tuesday will be peaking, the Thursday will be lower, and then say, oh, well, but Thursday not good for wellness, and so on and so on. So it has so many characteristics that lacks standardization, which is a good thing from the industry perspective. From data perspective, it's terrible.
I'm thinking back on. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, Laszlo is already going down the rabbit hole, right? Of here's why this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
You have a package price. Well, how do you do that? We've always tried to say, let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. Let's try something. But even the good was so hard, because we said, well, is it an hour? Is it 50 minutes? Is it 90 minutes? Like, we bumped into this issue on day 1, hour 1, that people said, well, but is it really comparable?
Mm.
And we've had such a hard time getting to defining even treatment. It really, or mani-pedi sort of was a overarching theme, and then treatment was one, and retail was another one. But there were so many gray areas and so many overlaps that people said, well, now I can't compare it to mine, so therefore then it's not relevant to me, so therefore then why would I give you the data? And exactly the conversation that Laszlo is having right now is the conversation that we had over and over. And it's hard, to come up with something that is not perfect but good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fine line, because if it's not helpful, people are like, well, then I'm not going to participate until you make it helpful to me.
No, that's a great point. Jan, back to our discussions of 15 years ago, when we were trying to get this data for spas, and spas basically did 2 things. They did massages and facials. And to your point, it was maybe a 60 or a 75 minute or a 90 minute, but that was it. And now, I mean, the menus are so long, and we have all these new modalities being introduced. As I mentioned earlier, we have halo therapy and LED booths and flotation tanks and, compression therapy and cryotherapy. And so it's just becoming even more muddled. We know that consumers want wellness. We know there's a demand for that. And that was heightened through COVID. We saw that people began buying Pelotons and going to gyms and eating better, and all of those sectors in the Global Wellness Institute numbers that went up, because humans thought, okay, I need to do something to make myself better. And now I want to do it when I travel, for business or for leisure. So how do we move from here? We're in this quandary of, we have a product that is wanted by the world, and yet we have a hard time quantifying how much you should invest or how much you should expect to return. And I like your point, Jan, of, we don't need perfect, we need something that's good enough. But where do we start?
Well, I think that goes back to Laszlo's very early point, right? Maybe the comparable has nothing to do with the nitty-gritty detail, because then suddenly things fall apart and people are like, well, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. But maybe, Laszlo's approach just to say there's the rooms revenue and that's our base. And what is the spa piece on top of it? Is it 1.5? Is it 1.2? Is it 0.8? And that people can then translate over, and then they have to say, okay, so what are we doing versus what are the other people doing that give us that benchmarking data? But maybe there is something about just the highest level total revenue, number that can be interesting. And that's pretty easy to track. Of course, then you're like, well, but what about retail? And what about facials? And you immediately start to pick at it again. But you have to start somewhere, Laszlo. I'm curious to hear what your thought is.
I think I'm in sort of agreement, as well as I'm blubbing now, because that's just such a difficult situation. I think I personally, since I built a system just like yours, obviously not just like that, and not 30 years. So I did talk to a lot of operators and owners and others on a daily basis of what's going on. I could write a series of books about how difficult it is to train staff to enter data properly when it's not automatically sucked out of your system. And that's definitely not a spa business that you just let a third party, retrieve data on a daily basis from your bookkeeping. That I don't think is going to happen. Not in the near future, probably. But when you look at something like, I think it makes a difference how much time a guest may spend at a wellness sort of unit inside, and how much money that person actually spend total on all the things he or she could possibly spend on. So you might have a 30 minute, an average 30-minute stay or 1 hour stay, average spend is $120. And then you can select it's an urban spa, that's a resort spa, that's a this and that. Something along that line, I can imagine. And then you can include the walk-in places without overnight stay, because there are so many standalone spas, and there are some attempts to create data for the standalone spas. We don't mention company names at the moment, but there are some attempts that are doing so. But I think some sort of really aggregated number, Jan, I don't know what you think about that can be a very distant indication of one. And obviously then someone will say but that spa is in New York. I happen to be in, I don't know, outside of Houston. It's nothing to do with me. Yes, that's true. But we talk about urban spas, we talk about average spend and average time spent. And you don't turn it back to per square meterage, per staff, or per treatment hours, or per all those KPIs that you have in the spa operation, because then you will lose the data into very detail. But I can imagine something like that actually making a sense. Then it's a thermal facility is a hot spring facility. You don't have treatments necessarily, but you have an entrance fee, which includes literally everything. And then various countries can also join in. I don't know, I probably would tackle the issue from this angle. Jan, what do you think?
So you're saying that there's a total revenue per guest?
Yes.
Back to your total RevPAR, TRevPAR. Mm-hmm. The good thing is you can come up actually with the GOP number for the total revenue, like what's left over, which is what everybody wants to know. What's the gross operating profit? The good thing is that what you're proposing is fairly straightforward, because everybody knows what their revenues are, and how many people are walking through your door. That's the good thing. Then you're bumping back into people are saying, well, but is that really comparable to me? And I think we need to get away from that and just say, well, let's just start collecting it. What happens?
Yeah, and I think what the trick is that in a branded hospitality scenario, it's relatively easy to say I'm a 5-star property, so you have X number of square footage in terms of room space, blah, 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 blah. In the spa/wellness business, you would have the initial categorization as a complicated thing, because you can have 15, 20 different types of facilities. It's not a 5-star hotel. It could be a hot spring facility, could be a hotel wellness center, whatever it is. I think the difficulty is the front end and not the data end. And then you can tell Jan, all these people, yes, in 5 years' time, we will answer your question in terms of the details because we have the database. But then onwards, you would have some insights, and obviously that could be more like a pilot, certain countries or certain states in the US for the matter, starting to collect data based on that. And just one more point here is, if we said that 70% of branded, non-branded out of the US, in the spa/wellness business, I think it's more like 10 versus 90%, where you would have so many independent, standalone places being operated by families, and lifestyle entrepreneurs, wellpreneurs for the matter, and so on and so on. So I think the front end part is difficult to provide the new standard book as definitions and categories, and then only asking for total revenues and number of guests. And then you start the database. I know it sounds terribly simplistic, and I'm doing research for 30 years. It sounds terrible how simplistic it may sound, but something like that. I think operators would be convincible as such.
I like the idea of counting by guest rather than room. And to your point, Laszlo, you have places with day entry without a room.
Yeah.
And so that plays into that. Jan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with that is that immediately, maybe even after the first summit, I got approached with saying, so what about day spa? Because
right.
Aren't we competing? If I'm in a hotel and I have a day spa next door, aren't we competing also? So how do we account for that? And what you're proposing is just a metric where it doesn't really matter if you're in the property or off the property, right? Because it's just revenues and guest counts, and you can still make some
who said you don't include the day spas?
Well, right, for sure.
It's just all, it's just the data that, because I'm such a hotel guy, I was like, no, I need a bed, I can't do this, but of course you need to have a much broader lens than that.
Well, we do. I mean, let's look at the US. We have estimated 26,000 spa establishments, probably 22,000 of which are independently owned day spas. They are not part of a brand. The hotels get all of the attention. They make beautiful products that get all the covers of the magazines, but it's not necessarily the engine of the industry, even globally. I mean, Asia is full of day spas, independently owned day spas. So I think in Europe, it's a little more hotel centric, but we do have to cast a wider lens.
But then to me, the question then is, okay, so then why are we doing this, right? Because if you get approached by Blackstone, who says, hey, I have a bag of money, I want to invest, are they going to build a Thai foot massage parlor, or are they really more interested in, a 5-star 100-hectare resort, So I think we need to understand, why are we gathering the data? Are we doing it to help the Global Wellness Institute to come up with benchmarks for everybody, or we're trying to help a consultant facilitate a specific high-end project, which really, as you said, I mean, let's use your numbers, if there are 22,000 day spas, call it 4,000 hotel spas, they probably just want those, so you sort of narrowing the focus to see who's using the data for what.
Mm-hmm.
I think since you have the technology, it sounds like I'm advocating CoStar. I'm not yet on the payroll, so sorry about that. that you have the technology to analyze, collect the data and tabulate the data, analyze the data. And I do believe so that should someone have data which can be filtered, maybe not on a daily performance basis, but a monthly performance basis, because you don't necessarily need daily first, but you would have a daily or monthly or even annual. And you can, that's what I mean, that the front end, the categorization and the benchmarking is very tediously done, such as you still know what's the square footage, you still know, is it an urban facility, still know it's branded, still know it's this and that. So should you have an operator coming in or an investor, guys, yes, I know in an urban facility, more than 1 million citizens, or then that urban standalone spa can do the following average performance per guest. That is valuable, which is very different from the CoStar daily sending out the benchmark, blah, blah, blah. But it still is a different kind of business proposition and would help the hotel market as well. It really sounds like I'm supporting CoStar now. But
that's okay, keep going.
I will send you a check later. But then I'm seriously thinking about the landscape of the business. This is a different kind of business than hospitality. So the data collection should follow that suit. So it should have a different kind of data collection. But still, end of the day, the two would support the other. But how the data collected and how it interpreted could be, or maybe even should be, very different. It doesn't mean that one is wrong, another one is right. Mm-hmm. It's more like you just take into consideration that's a different kind of business. Not independent, dependent in certain cases, related in most cases, but not the same.
And that's when you bump into, we piggyback at STR all the services, all the data off the hotel side. Like it all stands and falls, but it all stands and begins with the hotel piece, with the revenue manager trusting us, with the marketing people trusting us, with the data people trusting us. And we're saying, oh, can you just add this little thing? It's not easy, I'm making it sound easy. And then you're trying to get to piggyback in the data feed, get some more data in. I totally hear you, Laszlo, that for a broader lens, that's not helpful. That's just the way the business on the STR data collection side has evolved. It always starts with the hotel.
But you have no retail. You have no office spaces. I mean, who says you can't do spa? It's like convincing your board. You haven't invited me to convince your board, but they really, I think that's why I said pilots. Should you have, I don't know, I'm going to mention our names, Blue Spas, WTS, whatever it is, signing up for it and said, guys, we pilot it, we come on board, try it, shall see how it goes, just for a year, and then shall see how that goes. And then you speak to the Day Spa Association, guys, we want to help the business a bit, we do a nominal fee. I am not obviously sales representative of CoStar, but I how difficult it is to convince people to share data with you, actually very delicate data with you, the third party, and not giving back much, even for a relatively long period of time. But without the first pioneers, nothing is going to work. No system is going to work.
Yeah, and then you bump into on any company side, right? That this is going to be probably on page 4 of the to-do list, right? Like because we, like within the CoStar universe, I mean, I love hotels dearly, but they don't really matter when you think about the total amount of money spent in deals on office space, in retail malls, in industrial warehouse space, and then right now in the US, multifamily is hot. That's where a lot of the attention is, and hotels are sort of, they're over here, and then spas are sort of over here. So it's hard to get people's attention for this, where you're saying, oh, this is important to the industry, where the focus on a large, data gathering entity is on a bunch of other food groups, and as I said, spas or Hotels are on page 2 and spas are on page 4.
Well, Jan, you make a great point that sort of reflects the way development goes today. I mean, we used to have, you were a hotel, you were an office building, you were an apartment building. Now we're seeing it all together. We're seeing, large buildings in urban environments today are often only part a hotel and also part residential or office space, because the numbers have gotten so big, it's difficult to substantiate any one of those alone. And this further clouds our pool, if you will, of what the data would look like. Earlier, we talked about, who wants that data? I mean, if you're Blackstone, you're looking to scale, and you're not interested in these small numbers, but the people who live and die by that, might be a lot more interested in us starting somewhere. And I love this discussion about, like Laszlo and I said when we were texting earlier, what do we do? Like, we're having this discussion, the three of us, and the answer is we don't know the answer, but we can't throw up our hands and say, well, we're not going to try, because wellness is booming. So, some closing thoughts on where do we go now?
Well, obviously, I failed my elevator pitch with Jan and the board, so that's the end of there. In a way, but finally, this may not be a global thing. It could be a local thing, as in I wouldn't say destination level, but more like country level or state level service, where it could actually make more sense. So it could be something when something like that is being created, that it could be multiplied, but with taking the local characteristics into account, because business is so fragmented and so varied, which is good for the business, but not for the data. Is agreed. So that could be a way in which it evolves, that local markets may come up with a solution for collecting, comparing, or monitoring performance. And then you would need to aggregate it, not just adding and multiplying the very same, but having an adaptation of that to various markets. That potentially be one of the solutions.
I think at STR, we're going to continue to do what we do, which is we collect full P&L data every month, and SPA is a line item, but it's just a line item, and it only works for hotels, and it's likely only for large urban or large resort properties. It's a subset of a subset of a subset, but it's something, even though it's not super comparable to some family-run entity in the middle of Italy. And I think I'm going to come back to Laszlo's suggestion at the very beginning to say, well, maybe there's just some high-level KPIs, revenue and people, revenues and guests, and maybe there's a there to come up with some metrics that can be scaled globally and across property types.
Just adding to that, and I think that's a valid point, Jan. I think especially because it's a subset of a subset of a subset, it can come from the consumer end of how much money one may spend on these kind of services, less so from the receiving end, which is an aggregated number, but more like on consumer consumption percentages, to see that this is spent on spa, and then of course it becomes about the spa, blah blah. But that comes on fitness, and that comes of let's say holistic and all that. So I think there is an opportunity here to monitor or map more like consumer spending on these kind of services, and because of the little subset of a bigger picture from the supplier end, probably should start from the consumer end to see this market. People spend X much on, and you have a list of wellness and fitness and That's beautiful, and you have a number. But what if you wanted to bring a product which never existed on that market, and you wanted to have data for that market to convince the owner to develop that? Because there's no data about this, so obviously there's no market, which obviously is rubbish. But then we run into this kind of scenario. But that's for the next podcast, Lisa.
Yes, more work needs to be done. I think we can agree.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your contributions. I think it's a fascinating discussion, and it does shine a light on the complexity of collecting data and then dicing that data. You know, when Jan, you said the spa line on the hotel P&L, and of course, then we think, well, does that include fitness? I mean, in a hotel, it probably does, but maybe in a standalone, it wouldn't. So much data being generated, obviously a need to have more. And I think I love Laszlo's idea. We just start with something simple and go from there. Let's see what happens. Thank you, Jan Freitag and Laszlo Puczko, for joining us on StarrCast, and thank you for your great work.
Thank you very much.